Hello, everybody. I'm Christy Craig. I'm the publisher at Hidden Timber Books. Welcome on a Sunday afternoon. I'm so glad that you're here. This is the first reading of our 2021 series for the Small Press Author Readings, and I'm really excited to have Caitlin Hamilton Summie here today. I want to, first of all, if you've seen any of these readings before, you may have seen that sometimes I like to mention another book just before we get started. And a lot of times it's a small press book, but today I want to just read a little snippet to you from this book by Margaret Atwood, Negotiating with the Dead, a writer on writing. It's one of my favorite books. And the reason I chose it for today is, it's been an outrageous in a bad way kind of week. So it's really important, I think, no matter what, to just acknowledge what's going on. And it would be easy to think, especially if you're a writer in times like these, when there's so much uncertainty and discord and violence and you name it, what's the point? Why do we keep writing our stories, especially if they're fiction? Why, how do they benefit us? How does art really help our society? And there's a lot of people, you can go to learn how art really helps us grow as humans and to improve our humanity and compassion. But this book I brought out because Margaret Atwood, reached out to, or she curated a list of answers to that question of why do you do it? Who are you writing for? And why do you do it? And it's really long, and I'm just going to pick out a few because I think they speak to a lot of what's happening today and this year and last year. She says, to record the world as it is, to set down the past before it is all forgotten, to excavate the past because it has been forgotten. Because to write is to take risks, and it is only by taking risks that we know we are alive. To produce order out of chaos, to express myself beautifully, to create a perfect work of art. To reward the virtuous and punish the guilty, to hold a mirror up to nature, to hold a mirror up to the reader, to paint a portrait of society and its ills, to express the unexpressed life of the masses, to defend the human spirit and human integrity and honor, because to create is human, because to create is godlike. And there's more. You can always check that book out, but I like to go back to that list sometimes when I'm feeling not quite sure. I'll just say that. So thank you for letting me take a moment to share that. And now I want to get to today's event with Caitlin Hamilton Summie. She earned her MFA with distinction from Colorado State University. She's been published in journals such as the Wisconsin Review, the Mud Season Review, Long Story Short, and more. She co-owns a book marketing firm called Caitlin Hamilton Marketing and Publicity. And that's actually how Caitlin and I met. She's introduced me to a number of great authors and books. And, I've always enjoyed everything that she sent my way. And I'm super excited today to have her on to talk about her work this time. So thank you, Caitlin, for being here. And I think, just to get things started, what I would love to know is, after hearing that bit from Margaret Atwood's book, what is it that resonates with you as far as, who you are as a writer, or why you choose to write the stories that you write?
Well, before I say anything about that, I hope it's okay to say thank you to Christy Craig and to Hidden Timber Books. I've been in the book world a long time, as a publicist, as a writer, as a student, and the effort you're making to highlight small press authors and small press titles is absolutely critical. It's become more and more critical throughout my career, quite frankly. So thank you for generously having me on, and thank you for everything you do to highlight other voices from the small press world. And thank you all for coming. Some of you may have noticed I got a little teary when I saw some of the names and faces pop up on the screen, I probably will get teary. Um, I haven't seen Claire Kiley for 20 years. Um, so deeply touched that all of you chose to spend part of your afternoon with me and with Christy. So thank you. The things that resonate for me as a writer are not maybe the same things that resonated from what you shared. I was struck by the comment or the phrase that we hope people, we punish the guilty, we praise the successful. I don't think of my fiction like that. For me, stories connect us, and sometimes they heal us. And I've often said, I think sometimes they save us. And I think that's true for writers, and I think it's true for readers. And so for me, I write fiction out of a necessity. I feel compelled. I hear a voice, and I write a line, and I keep going until I know what the story is. I think it's one reason my stories take so long. But I write out of this urgent need, and I think it's common. I see so many writers here, Anne, Jan, Heather, Nicole, I mean, Eleanor. I think we all write for different reasons, but I think we all feel a certain need, and that certainly is where I start. I do think our stories save us. Maybe that's kind of why we're gathered during this terrible week all together to talk about fiction. I just wanted to briefly share a few things about my writing journey, and then I'm going to read very briefly from a story. I don't know that our whole story is appropriate to share right now, but I did want to share with you that my book, To Lay to Rest Our Ghosts, took 25 years. Those writers who are slogging away on year 9, keep going. It took me 25 years. I started the collection. Many of the stories in this collection came out of my years in graduate school, actually, during my MFA program. And then I had what I call my happy interruptions, my 2 children. I have a business. I have a family. I help care for my parents sometimes. So life led me down a 25-year path. But as I said at my book launch, to my children who were old enough at that point to understand what the dream of publication meant, who'd walked part of the journey with me, and to my 80-plus-year-old parents who would have crawled to get there, I told them that it was worth waiting 25 years if I had gotten to celebrate with all of them. And that's how I felt. This is a story collection about family and relationships primarily. It's about loss. It's about reconciliation. And ultimately, I think it's about hope. What I write about are those moments in our lives when, as people, we think we might break, or we think we need to reevaluate where we've come from and who we are. I am not interested in writing, although I love to read them, big plotty books. The biggest thing that happens in one of my stories is that somebody might forgive somebody else. These are very character-driven stories, and they're really about our day-to-day life and how we get through. And that's what interests me. One of the things when I was preparing this talk that really kind of surprised me was that since I started writing these stories in my 20s, here I am still writing about the same themes in my 50s. This is what I care about, who we are, why we got to the place we're in, who we carried with us, how we forgave, how we learned to forgive, how we survived. I want to also thank today Fomite Press and bring that press to your attention for a moment. I see some other Fomite authors on, Jan Larry, Lynn Sloan, and it's either Fred or Edie Ramey, maybe both. Fomite Press was started, I think, in 2011 by Mark Estrin, who himself is a novelist, and he went to these readings in Vermont and in Burlington, where he lives, and he was really impressed with a lot of the things he heard. And he would talk to people afterward about their publication journeys, and he found that many of them were unpublished or they couldn't find agents. And so he started Fomite. And Fomite Press publishes literary fiction, poetry, essays, political tracts. It's a not-for-profit. It considers itself actually post-capitalist, and they only take a certain percentage of authors' earnings, just enough to fund the press. It is a mission. It is heart-filled, and they have done beautiful award-winning books, more than 100 to date. So thank you to Fomite for taking a chance on me, and I hope you'll take a chance on them. I'm really excited to share that in a year my first novel will come out with Fomite. 3 of the stories in this collection are about the Macmillan sisters, Sarah and Glennie, and Sarah's husband Al. And my novel will finish their story and tell you what happened to them. I've had a couple readers ask. I think that the sisters' relationship has really touched a few people. I hope so. And so I will be telling everyone what happened to them. I am also a book publicist. I've been a book publicist for so long that I can't actually remember when I started. So when I read, a lot of people are really interested in the book publicity angle and the fact that I sit on both sides of the desk. And so I'm going to read briefly, and then I'm happy to answer questions, not just about my writing. Every place I go, people want to ask about book publicity, and I understand that. It's a tough publishing world right now, getting tougher. And so I understand if people are interested and want to speak more about the business than the prose. It's been my privilege to launch many fine writers. Perhaps much like Fomite, I consider it my mission. And I think that derives from the fact that I do believe stories can save us. I do believe those connections matter. And I very much want to amplify and protect and support voices that I believe are important. With that said, I'm going to read briefly from a novel called, a story called Sons. This is one of my favorite stories because it took the least amount of time. Those of you who may know me know that one story in this collection took six years. One story in this collection took 20 years. And yes, there were gaps, huge gaps. There were years where I didn't touch certain stories. But this one took 24 hours because I was on a deadline and I had nothing to present. It was edited in workshop later. It was also edited when it was published. But this is the one story that came out of me like a gift. When I was 8, my father woke me in the middle of the night to watch a calf being born. I woke to the rolling, rich sound of his laughter, then boards creaking as he climbed the stairs. Before I could drift back to sleep, on my warm, soft feather tick, my door opened. I smelled the cold air on him, a whiff of manure, and sat up in bed. Harry, he said, get up. In the kitchen, he handed me my first cup of coffee. The coffee tasted bitter, and I set the mug down, believing nothing could be worth all this trouble. But my father was alive that night, as if on fire, as if someone had set a light inside him. He glowed. My father grabbed me by the hand, and we jogged across the yard. The night air was cold. Sub-zero temperatures slapped me awake. Our boots crunched the snow as we ran. I will remember this always, this jog to the barn in the middle of the night with only the light of the stars. I couldn't quite keep up with my father, whose legs bore him forward in great strides. Our 3 one-story barns stretched long and low in front of us. My father pushed open the door to the second, ushering me inside. The barn was flooded with light, which made me blink. I wanted to stop to catch my breath, but my father's palms rested on my shoulders, propelled me forward to the far end of the barn, where Dr. Vargas with his pointy beard stood, a black bag opened at his feet, and his arm stuck up to the elbow in one of our cow's back ends. I started to leave. No, 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 my father said, grabbing me by the shoulder and pulling me back. This is okay. This is life. Dr. Vargas laughed, then lowered his head. His forehead wrinkled. He spoke to my father. This will be a difficult one, James. The cow moaned. I looked up at my father, whose hand still rested on my shoulders. What's he doing? I asked. Then my father did something that focused my undivided attention on that moaning cow. My father spoke to me in Swedish. He said, "Titta här, Smulan. Look." My father called me Smulan affectionately. In Swedish, Smulan means crumb. I think of this now as I sit in a dimly lit hallway listening to the nurses on the night shift tell each other about their Christmas plans. I can't see them well from where I sit. I see only the circular mauve desk surrounding them, the pool of light that bathes it. The pool of light reminds me of the barn, reminds me of the calf's birth is the only one I've ever seen. Reminds me that watching a calf being born is no preparation. My father was wrong. That was not life. One of the nurses laughs, and the sound of her laughter carries down the hall past me. I stand and rub my eyes. I wonder what time it is. I'm not wearing my watch. I'm wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, a down jacket and slippers, Megan's slippers, which are pink. I think of how she looked tonight as we raced to the car, biting her lip, holding her tummy, one wayward brown curl falling in her eyes, of the thin, tense smile she gave me as the nurses rolled her down the hall and away from me. My father and mother are waiting for my second phone call. I imagine them now sitting at the kitchen table. My mother has her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and my father's leaning back on the two back legs of his chair, feet propped on the table, smoking his pipe. I imagine that my mother's watching the clock and shaking her head, and I imagine that my father's deferring to my mother's experience, letting her shake her head, letting her mutter, "This isn't good." When I called from the lobby phone not too long ago, that's what she said. "This is not good. We know we have a boy. We just didn't expect him this soon." Farther away in St. Paul, Megan's parents wait, trapped inside their house by a sudden December blizzard. I can't imagine them clearly. Maybe Mrs. Hall is making coffee when in crisis she usually does. Mr. Hall is probably clutching the keys to his Chevy Impala, waiting for the snow to stop. Most likely, though, he's decided not to wait, just like my son. Instead, he's sliding down 94 East with Mrs. Hall, following the headlights to western Wisconsin and to the small hospital where I stand now, listening to nurses laugh. My parents will not come. I stand and stretch my legs, then lean against the wall. I don't understand the waiting. My mother's voice, soft and low, echoes in my head. This is not good. But waiting doesn't matter as long as everything turns out all right. There is no price I would not pay. The calf was breech, so Dr. Vargas had to turn it around. He stuck his arm inside the cow, almost up to his shoulder, placed his free hand on her backside, and worked on turning that baby calf. The cow moaned, and when she did, Dr. Vargas whispered to her. He whispered she'd be all right. He nodded to himself. Yes, she'd be fine. Then Dr. Vargas lifted his chin and grinned at my father. Here he comes. Dr. Vargas slowly pulled his arm out of the cow. His arm was smeared with blood, and the shirt sleeve he'd pulled up to his elbow was stained. As his hand came out of the cow, his fingers were gripping two hooves. I remember I stepped closer and watched as the skinny legs emerged, and then the nose, and finally, in a great rush, the whole heavy body wet with birth. Dr. Vargas caught the calf against his chest and laid it gently on the straw next to the cow. I stared at the shivering calf at my feet. Its eyes were open, it looked at me, and I stared back. Dr. Vargas smiled at me, stretching his mouth so wide that his beard stretched as well and became even more pointed. Not bad for a night's work. Hey, Harry, he said. I heard my father behind me. He's never seen a calf being born before. We had 3 barns then. Later, we tore down the 3rd because we had fewer cows, because the barn was too old. We expected to rebuild. We didn't have the latest equipment, the size, or the clout to convince the bank to give us a loan. We were a family business. We relied on our reputation, but our reputation wouldn't pay the bills. The older I grew, the worse we did. We lost business. We scaled back. We got by. I've lost track of time, and I searched the pale yellow wall for a clock. A sketch of a barn and the silos on the hospital wall, and I suddenly feel like I'm lost in a shopping mall, looking at a floor plan for the red triangle which will tell me where I am, orient me, but this picture doesn't orient me. This picture tells me where I am not. My father and I don't speak anymore. Whenever I call, my mother answers the phone. She apologizes for him. She asks if Megan and I are okay, listens to my yes, then quickly tells me that Mr. Hendrickson wants our cows. She still calls them our cows, as if I have claim to them. I say nothing. On rare occasions, she asks about my job. I lie. I don't tell her that I miss hearing the cows lowing. I don't explain how much I miss watching the sunrise behind the barns, or eating family meals around our aged wood table, or drinking bad coffee, thick as sludge. Some things cannot last. Some things last too long. I'm tempted to ask one of the nurses what time it is, but then I think, I don't really want to know. Thank you.
Oh, that's a great story. Your writing is very quiet in a good way. You're writing about serious topics, about, as you said, loss and reconciliation. You're writing about war. And yet it doesn't feel oppressively dark. I don't know if that really makes sense. It's just a nice,
Well, that's
quiet way. I don't mean that. Yeah, I think you know what I mean. It's to
good.
talk about writing is quiet. It's just I think for me as a reader, it allows me to slip into the story and take it all in instead of like being a bit defensive, like what am I about to read if I turn the page. And sometimes people enjoy those suspense kind of stories, but I really love this kind of writing as well. It's just a nice a nice soothing aspect to your work.
I think it's gently told, each story, but I think there's an emotional intensity, and I have always hoped that those will balance each other. And I think if I push too hard, that it it will force something in the stories. I think that what I want for my stories is to be deeply felt. I want you to walk with this young man down the hospital hallway, hoping. I mean, he's terrified, and I think if too much distracts from that, then you lose your connection to a character. So I appreciate very much what you're saying. In publishing, on the business side, you don't want a quiet story. Quiet is not a good word on the business side, but it is to me. It means I did
Right.
it right. So thank you.
Right. Thanks. Anne, I see you have a question. Would you like to pop in and ask yourself?
Hello, Caitlin. How are you?
Hi,
Beautifully read. Beautifully read.
Anne.
Somehow you manage to, your stories are packed with emotion, and yet you never go over the line with too melodramatic. It's not melodramatic. So how do you manage that powerful punch without going overboard? You're so gifted with that. And I'll go into, I'll mute myself.
Thank you. Um, I think the honest answer is, well, thank you. That's a very touching comment. The honest answer is I don't know. I'm glad you feel that way about the stories. Um, I'm not quite sure how I achieve the balance that you see, although I'm very glad that you see it. I do know in a piece that I'm working on now um, that I had an ending and I thought, oh, that's melodramatic, and I cut it back and rewrote it, and then I thought it's still off, and I couldn't tell why, and I cut it back and I rewrote it, and then I sat up and tried to figure out how I wanted it to work. It's the opening part of my novel coming out next year that Mark Estrin is having me rewrite. Um, but how I wanted that piece to end to work with the whole, and then I got it. But the first ending was melodramatic. It kind of sang, you could hear the choir going, no, and I thought, no. So I don't know. I move a lot by instinct. And I think it's another reason I take forever to write anything. I feel my way forward like a mole, you know. I'm really slow.
I think, too, you kind of said it, like you don't want to force the story, and because you are in book publicity and marketing, you've read a ton of stories, and so that's part of the skill that as a writer that I pick up. The more that I read, I can see what works and doesn't work, even if it's just for me as a reader, and then that becomes sort of instinctual. And I imagine that maybe that's true for you too.
Yeah, it is. I think it, me as a writer is a delicate balance between instinct and thinking. And um, at a certain point, because I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser, which means I feel my way forward rather than craft my way forward. I think at a certain point, I have to make a decision, especially with the larger piece, and apply some thought. I always know when the notes are wrong. It's almost like a composition to me, not prose. I can hear the wrong note. So I do feel my way forward. And I saw Heather wrote a question, and she asked which writers inspire me, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't read my genre when I'm writing my genre. Generally speaking, at a certain point, I stop. It doesn't mean that I never read a short story for 20 years, but what it means is at a certain point in the crafting, I cannot read in my genre. But all kinds of writers inspire me. I love William Maxwell. I love May Sarton. One of my favorite books is a John Irving book. I'm a big fan of P.D. James, the mystery writer. I read poetry. I like character-driven fiction and beautiful prose. I love a good puzzle, even though I don't write them. One of my favorite books of all time, a big hunking book that I took to Japan as my reading, was the first volume of William Manchester's biography of Churchill. Absolutely fabulous, gorgeous prose, one of the best endings I've ever read. It was a doorstop. It got me to Japan.
That's awesome. I wondered about your stories as far as like setting and sense of place. You're writing these stories about people in this small town, in this very I would say tight community. They all know each other, and they all show up for each other in one way or another. So what is it about, how does sense of place work for you when you're writing stories, or how do you bring setting into your stories, whether it's for this book or the novel that you've got coming out? I mean, it's the same characters, but how does that all work together to create your story?
I think setting is just so foundational for me. I think that setting is its own character. I think that home, me personally, has always been where my people are. But as a writer, place defines my people. Weather defines my people. And I think it shapes them as much as their relationships have. So literally grounding my characters in a place and in a climate is essential to me. I saw a question from Eleanor. Hi, Eleanor. She asked how I separate my two roles out, and as a publicist and a writer, and my clients come first. They have to. I think it's important. I think it's ethical. So I write when I have time, and I carve out, like sometimes I take my lunch hour. I work from home, so then I grab a PBJ or something. It's not like a formal lunch hour. I might give myself a lunch hour to write, or I might take 15 minutes in the morning, and then I tack on 15 minutes at night. Generally here at our marketing firm, the philosophy is clients come first, and my stuff has to come second. I never ever want a client to feel that, you know, I was distracted myself. So clients come first.
Thank you. And thanks for those questions. I would love to hear you read again, and then we can have some more conversation as well. So if you haven't asked your question yet, or you've got one ruminating, you'll have another opportunity here in just a bit.
This is from the first story in my collection, and it's called Tags. It's about World War II. Jimmy Weston had his dad's dog tags. He wore them around his neck on a steel chain and had this funny habit of rubbing them back and forth between his fingers. We'd be playing marbles or collecting tin for the war effort. We'd be jumping on cracks to break Hitler's back, or be waiting, just waiting, for the whole thing to end. And Jimmy would talk and rub those tags together, and I'd listen. That's mostly how I remember those days. Jimmy and me sitting on the curb, tired of marbles, tired of tin. Him with the sound of his father, and me with nothing of mine but his name. My father enlisted when I was 4. He was quiet about it, according to my mother, but she knew he was planning on signing up. Before the war, the men met after their day shift for beer or a game of ball or cards, but not after the war began. Then they started home when the whistle blew. Too sick of the brewery to think of beer, too distracted to finish a game, they peeled off from one another at each doorway with catcalls and jokes and day-weary voices, but then the talk began. The sky would go pitch, lights would fill window frames, and then the men would come over. Jimmy's dad and my uncles and others my mom does not name. She'd be standing at the sink, hands greasy and dripping and slick, and there would be a soft rap on the door, or the low groan of the wooden porch steps, or just the feeling suddenly that she was not alone. And she'd turn, and there was Uncle Joey, or Uncle Ray, or any of them. How many, I once asked. I was 15, maybe 16, wanting to hear the details again, confident in my newly discovered remove. She shrugged. 5, she said 6, sometimes 7, all around that little kitchen table. How come they came to our house? She shook her head. We were the midpoint, halfway down the block, I don't know. Maybe I served the best coffee. She smiled, but her smile quickly faded. They knew, my mother said, that they wouldn't all come back. We all knew that. I nodded, but only as a reflex, because we did not all know that. I didn't. Jimmy didn't. We were the littlest ones, the ones who learned slowly, much later than everyone else, what the absences meant. I remember catching on. I remember sitting on the curb late one afternoon in the middle of winter, wrapped in wool, listening to Jimmy rub those dog tags together. I remember thinking as the sun went down and the chill set into me that Jimmy's father was up there somewhere in bits and pieces.
I was rereading that story just earlier, and again, you know, what stands out to me in that particular story is just that idea of community and neighbors and sharing the load, and how at one point in time they all come together for just that quiet solidarity and comfort. And first it's the men, and then it's the women, and then it's the friends, the young friends. And it's just a beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you. Anne asked how I capture the male point of view. And I guess this is the point in the author talk where I share the fact that I always wrote from male point of view before I started. In graduate school, I was asked to try to write from female point of view, and it was really hard for me. I write what I hear, and those were the stories I heard. I've since, of course, started writing in female point of view and did in graduate school, but I write the voice I hear, and it's often male first person. And I know there was some other questions. Somebody asked about research. Eleanor, I don't really do a lot of research. Any details from tags were actually family details, things I knew. This is not my family, and this is not exactly what happened to my family. It is a story. But I do go back, and that's where I do any research. So I get the voice, I get the emotion, and once I know the story's true to what I want to tell, I go back and I make sure the facts fit. And sometimes I have to revise, sometimes I have to make some changes, but I know I have the voice then. I know who my person is. Um, and what I'm really interested in when I write is an emotional truth. And so when I have that, I feel like I can revise to make facts fit or adjust facts to make the story realistic to the world. But I have got to cinch that emotional truth first.
I see Serena has a question.
Okay, sorry I missed it, Serena.
Oh, that's okay. How do you craft a short story that works well and doesn't leave the reader looking for a novel, and vice versa? What did you see as major differences between writing short stories and writing the novel?
You know, that's a really interesting, it's also a really tough question. I always felt that my stories depicted whole worlds, that you could understand, you had enough detail to understand the person, their place, and that they came with endings. And then one reviewer on Goodreads, I'm sure all the writers here are beginning to nod about the occasional review that just leaves them stumped. I really thought every book had an ending. I mean, every story had an ending, and this reviewer just felt that my stories were up in the air. And so I feel when I'm writing a story, I've got a whole world, I've got a conflict, and the conflict's resolved, and then it's done. But for the 3 stories I picked out to put into this novel, even though each story was done, I felt that people might have questions about what happened to them and would want to know basically if they made it through their lives, if they were able to heal, if they were able to reconcile, and honestly, if so, how? I think how became the big question for some readers. So it wasn't that the story didn't answer it, it's just that should you wish to learn more about these people, there was more to learn. I don't even know if that's an answer, Serena, but it's the best I've got today.
So let's talk a little bit about history, because your book is obviously, you know, built around the war, and but it's still, even so it's about a time in the past, it feels very current in a lot of ways. So how do you how do you view history and how it works in your writing, or how it works in stories in general? But yeah.
History is really important to me. I was a history major. I was a Middle Eastern history major at Smith, and I don't think I can write a story that doesn't have either the larger historical context or a personal history. I think in almost every story I write, you get a sense of a history. In Geographies of the Heart, it's based on a conflict that began years and years ago and hasn't been resolved. You know, in Sons, there's this deep rupture in a family in the background that's informed the whole present story. I mean, it just in Motherly. I mean, the personal history. I guess in all of my stories, in some way, personal history or history itself has suddenly come to a head, and these little irritations, like in clams, you know, little pieces of sand, they're about to either become pearls or just blow. You know, they're just I just don't think I can write a story without some kind of history because history matters so much to me. And I think tags might feel sadly relevant because sadly we're still at war, and sadly there are still kids whose dads aren't coming home. You know, I think that the emotional life that she has and the effects it has on her when you reach the end and you see a little bit more of her as an adult is it's still happening. So I think that's one reason, perhaps, that that story touches people. I don't know.
Yeah. I like that phrase, geographies of a heart.
Yeah, that's actually the title of the novel.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. When I started the collection and Mark Estrin asked me what I wanted the title to be, I didn't want to title the collection after one story because I didn't want to make any one story more important than the other. So I went through the book and chose 5 phrases from stories. And he said, "Well, let's do To Lay to Rest Our Ghosts." And a long time after that, I realized in preparing it for the final step of publication that that phrase is actually in 2 stories. So I thought, well, that's good on us, you know. But for the novel, I think Geographies of the Heart, because that story is in the novel, and I think it really speaks to the overarching theme of the novel. It seemed right to give it that placement. Anne asked if I ever saw myself writing about the pandemic. I don't know. And I might write about a very small family that works from home with 2 children and a new puppy and how they fared. It's very possible. Yeah. Staring at my ruined baseboards, I may be inspired.
Claire's asking when can we expect the novel to be available
Thank
to
you,
read?
Claire. January 18th, 2022.
Awesome.
Yep, that's the date. I truly have not seen Claire. I've not seen Claire for 20 years. You haven't changed. Hi.
That's true, but thank you.
Oh, I think there was another question that popped up and I missed it.
From Heather.
A unifying theme. Ah, um, you know, when the story collection was put together, I put them in order of age, from the youngest to the oldest. And I was told by Mark Estrin that it really didn't work. Nobody would notice. And so, I mean, it hadn't been anything I was tied to. I was just trying to throw something together to submit. And I know that sounds sort of odd, but I didn't have a lot of time, quite frankly. I was going to take this leap where they were going to go in this order. I put a really lousy title on it and I gave it a shot. And when Mark wrote back to me, I assumed it was a no. I was flabbergasted it was a yes. The whole family came to stand at my computer and share. When I sat back and thought about it, I switched the last 2 stories because although they're both about losses, I wanted the stories, pardon me, I keep saying that, I've got novel on the brain. I wanted the collection to end on a note of hope. And I think that putting together some kind of unifying theme wasn't really hard because so many of them deal with families, relationships, loss, and reconciliation. I think what really came to matter to me was the order in which they were introduced and ending on a note of hope and not being a battering ram. You know, I don't think certain stories should go back to back in this collection. There are 2 stories in particular I don't think should go back to back. So it was more about how much can a reader take? And you know, let's end on the positive here. Let's end on hope. Let's end on light. I believe in reaching for light, you know.
That's very much, just listening to you talk about the structure of the book, that's very much like the structure of a story. If you think about when you're writing the story and you're in an intense moment, then there's this use of white space, either for the reader to just, okay, take a breath, or you go into a different scene that just pulls away for a minute and then you get back to where you were. So I like hearing how, the book just mirrors that structure.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I think one of the fun things about sharing your work is hearing observations like this, things you hadn't thought of, recognizing things. You know, I think we all get those gifts as writers, those things that work that we didn't even plan. When we put so much time into things and we work so hard to get things to work, sometimes there are those serendipitous moments when we achieve something without trying. And that's wonderful. So thank you. That's a great thought. And That's interesting.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nicole has a quick question about your stories.
Okay.
Asking, your stories remind me so much of Elizabeth Strout's collections, Anything is Possible. I'm wondering if you feel that connection to her work.
I have never read her, so I don't know. I know Julie's going, what? I haven't. I think one of the things that I will always be chased by as a writer and as a publicist, in fact, is that I was not an English major. I was a Middle Eastern history major. So I went into my graduate program and people were talking about Malamud and I was saying Sufi poetry, anyone? I mean, there's so much I haven't read. I'm so far behind. So yes, there have been people who've compared my work to her, and that has been used in some of the marketing my husband did. My husband, Rick, is my publicist. But yeah, she's on the TBR pile.
Yeah, I always run out of time too. I've got, especially when the pandemic started, I was ordering all these books to try to, help support our local bookstore. And I had all these, this huge stack. I thought, how am I ever going to get through them? But I wanted to have those books. And then at a certain point, several months later, my husband and my daughter went to the PO box to pick up something, and it was obviously a book. And my daughter's response was like, she needs another one of those, because it was just sort of adding to the pile. But yeah, we need a reading retreat where you can just go and do nothing but read. And
I love that idea. I think you should start it. I'll help promote it.
okay.
I would love that.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I don't know if there is anyone else who would like to ask a question, or if you want to just have a discussion about the book, you certainly can, wave and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I know that Julie had mentioned in the chat box an essay on structure that I think I've heard. She did one of the readings early on, and I remember maybe she's mentioned that somewhere down the line. So it's definitely one that would be worth checking out, called Stacking Stones by David Jouse.
She's mentioned that to me before. Yeah. That was really a good
It's
book
really
to read.
helpful. I have it. It's like right next to my desk all the time. The whole craft book. I think they renamed the book, but my version is called Alone with All That Could Happen. But I think there's another name for it. But if you look up David Jouse and craft books, you'll find it. And I think the essay is available online. And yeah, he goes through just a lot of different ways you can structure a story collection, like mirroring or finding a common thread or all sorts of things, and definitely helped me in my collection.
Yeah, one of the things that's so interesting, I think as writers, we all have our readers, we all have the people we go to. And I know some people have whole, writing groups. I don't. I have a couple of people who've read pieces or who've read one or two have read the whole and helped with the opening a great deal. And I think that for me, when you think about structure, I think, I haven't read that book and I'll try and get it. But one of the things, and maybe this is true for you guys who are writers, which is why I mention it, one of the things that really makes me think about structure is how people respond. What they do or don't understand, especially in an opening. I think the questions from our readers, our writing groups, often, if you can hear them, they often help you lay the tiles down in the correct order. So I don't know how many people have a writing group or how many people have a reader or two, but I think structure often comes from really good questions. Mark Estrin asked a question, and I think that one of the interesting things is, so many of these pieces or stories, I think we'll lay it out as a novel in stories, perhaps not a novel. But Mark asked me a question about why a character became an OBGYN. And it made me realize that that had never been answered in any story that I'd ever written about her. And I knew the answer, so I was very happy to get it in there. When you're writing stories and then you're stringing them like pearls into a novel, and you're either going to make a novel in stories or just a straight novel, there are whole things that were never in the stories because they didn't belong there that all of a sudden you need to answer. It's not just structure, it's all kinds of things. And Anne brought that up to me too with my opening. Thank you, Anne. Why are they doing this? I don't know, Anne. Let me check.
So Gail had a question about asking if you had ever read Ursula Le Guin.
No, I haven't. Gosh, I've read a lot of things. Somebody asked me about something I've read. Why her, Gail?
She she passed away this year, an award-winning author of very different stories from yours, but yet not. She wrote in typically the science fiction and somewhat fantasy realm, but her stories are so rooted in connections and relationships. I think she's won every award going, and she's a Portland author, and she's got some short stories particularly I think you might like.
I'll check her out. I mean, I certainly know of her reputation. So
Yeah,
I will.
she is outstanding. So good to see
add
you.
her to the stack.
Yes, so good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you, Gail. Oh my gosh, I think it's been 20 years since I saw you.
Probably, yeah.
You never came to my house.
Well, this will prove that it's been 20 years. Yes.
Yeah, I've got a few. I've got them on the side. Yeah.
I got plenty. This is so great. I love your stories.
Thank you, Gail. Gail is my sister-in-law.
Oh, nice.
You're going to think my family never gets together, but it's really hard for everybody to get together.
It is, yeah.
They're across the country.
But I wanted to be here, and thanks for letting me know about it.
Oh, thank you. I'm touched you came.
That's part of the fun of doing these online events. You know, there's a lot of people who wouldn't be able to come to the in-person, but they, you know, we can connect this way.
We can, yeah. Tammy asked if I think short stories are becoming more popular right now because the pandemic has made it harder, I think, for some people to read. And I don't think so. I don't think so. Hi, Tammy. I don't think so. You know, people have always in the industry felt short story collections were really hard to market, and that people don't read short stories. And I read an article which I wish I had saved that disputed that. And I told you about it, Christy, I think, didn't I? Yeah, I wish I'd saved it. The thing I wanted to check was whether or not the collections that they used were big house collections or small press collections, because I think that there's a different level of marketing that can sometimes happen. But generally speaking, no, short stories and collections of them don't really sell well. Even now.
We are just about at 3 o'clock here, and because people have been asking you, have you read this? Have you read that? I would love to know what you're reading now.
Right now, I'm reading manuscripts for my job.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of leisure reading. I can tell you that I really like, yeah, I mentioned the writers I mentioned. I also like Jhumpa Lahiri. Anyone who loves short stories and hasn't read her, I recommend her. I'm trying to think. I got 1 or 2 books for Christmas. My mother was excited about the new T. Greenwood and bought me a copy of that. And Gail is suggesting I read 4 Ways to Forgiveness from by Ursula Le Guin. So I guess maybe that will also be put on the higher up on the pile.
Do you ever listen to audiobooks? Because I find a lot of times there are certain books I really want to read, and I know I'm not gonna get to it either. They're, you know, the big doorstop books, or just something that's outside of my usual genre, but I really want to experience it. And audiobooks for me has been a really great way to listen to certain stories, like All the Light We Cannot See. That was one that I don't know that I could have read it. I'm not sure why, but I really loved listening to it. And George Saunders' novel, Lincoln's Bardo, is to read it to me would be a challenge, but to listen to it was awesome. If you like audiobooks and you haven't, read that one or you haven't listened to it, it's so worth the time.
Audiobooks are huge. It's such a big market right now, and I know one of my buddies here listens to a lot of audiobooks because she's was in the car so much, taking her family different places. But I just really need a book, personally.
That's understandable. Yeah.
But Jan agrees with you. She thinks Lincoln in the Bardo was better as a audiobook. That's really interesting, actually, that you guys think that the audiobook might have been better than the story.
Well, what made his particular book so fun as an audiobook was there's a ton of different characters, and it would be easy to get lost on the page, especially for me, because I read a little and then I do other things and I read a little and I would get lost. But the audiobook was so well done because each character had a different voice, and a lot of them were actors that you would recognize their voice. And it just made it a really fun experience. It's fun to listen to them too on car trips sometimes, just if you're all in the car with your family or whatnot. Maybe not that one because there is some cursing, but other ones. Yeah. So I want to thank you again, Caitlin, for being here, and
Thank you for having me.
yeah, for everyone joining us today on a Sunday afternoon. It's been a fun discussion. I really loved hearing you read your stories.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing more about your novel for sure. Certainly stay on and look through the comments. There's been some really nice comments that I'm not sure if you were able to catch while you were talking and reading. And everyone, I put a link to Caitlin's website and to bookshop.org if you wanted to purchase a copy of her book. So just scroll back up through the chat box really quickly if you want to grab those. And pop back in for our next reading. We have several, more in January, and then February and March. And I've got more that we're scheduling along the way. So we're just going to keep this series going. And if you stop by hiddentimberbooks.com, you can check out who's coming up and mark your calendar. And I hope that I see you all again online soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, especially Christy.